The Georgia sun hung low in the sky, heavy and golden, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Highway 17. It was one of those late afternoons where the air feels thick enough to chew, warm, sticky and humming with the drone of cicadas. A dusty silver pickup truck rolled into the gravel lot of a roadside diner called Mama Lou's Pit Stop, its tires crunching softly as it came to a stop near the front door. The place wasn't much to look at. Peeling paint, a flickering neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet, and picnic tables out front stained with years of coffee rings and rain. But it was honest, real. The kind of spot travelers stopped at when they needed a hot meal and a moment of quiet. Inside, the air was cooler, smelling of fried chicken, strong coffee, and old wood. A ceiling fan creaked lazily overhead, doing its best against the lingering heat. Behind the counter, a teenage girl wiped down the register with a rag that had seen better days. She glanced up as the door jingled open. A man stepped in. He moved with a quiet kind of strength, shoulders straight but not stiff, eyes calm, boots scuffed from miles of road. He wore faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a dark ball cap pulled low over his forehead. On the front of the cap, stitched in simple white thread, were the words U.S. Army. He didn't make a show of it, didn't strut or announce himself. He just walked to the counter like any other tired traveler. "Coffee?" "Black," he said, his voice low and steady. The girl, Lily, though he didn't know her name, nodded and poured a cup from the pot behind her. She'd seen soldiers before. Her uncle had served, and she always made sure to give them a little extra care, even if it was just a warmer smile or a refill without asking. She slid the cup toward him. "Long drive?" she asked gently. "Yeah," he said, offering a small, tired smile. "Just passing through?" He took a sip, his eyes scanning the room without really looking at anything in particular. There was a weariness in him, not the kind that came from lack of sleep, but from carrying things most people never saw. He'd spent the last year overseas, not in some glamorous war zone shown on the news, but in a dusty outpost where the days blurred together, and the only thing that kept him grounded was the thought of coming home. Now home felt far away, even though he was getting closer with every mile. Outside, the rumble of engines cut through the afternoon calm. A group of motorcycles pulled into the lot, their pipes roaring like angry beasts, 5 of them big and gleaming under the sun, chrome flashing. The riders wore leather vests covered in patches, some with skulls, some with eagles, one with a faded Confederate flag that flapped in the breeze. They parked in a rough semicircle near the entrance, kicking stands down with practiced ease. The lead rider swung off his bike. He was broad-shouldered with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos, some faded, some fresh. One peeked out from under his sleeve, a crude black symbol that looked like a twisted cross. His eyes scanned the parking lot, then landed on the silver pickup. His lip curled slightly as if he'd smelled something bad. Inside, the soldier didn't notice. He was stirring a little sugar into his coffee, lost in thought. But Lily saw the bikers enter. She stiffened. She knew that group. They came through every few weeks, loud, rude, always demanding free pie or extra bacon for the road. They never tipped. And they always stared a little too long at anyone who didn't look like them. The big biker, everyone in town called him Razor, though no one knew if that was his real name, walked straight to the counter. He didn't look at Lily. His eyes locked onto the man in the army cap. "You lost, boy," Razor said, his voice rough like gravel under a boot. The soldier looked up slowly. "No anger, no fear. Just quiet awareness, no," he said evenly. "Just getting coffee." Razor snorted. "That your truck out there? Looks like it's held together with duct tape and prayers." "It gets me where I need to go," the soldier replied, taking another sip. Something about the calmness of the answer seemed to irritate Razor more than shouting would have. He leaned in, his shadow falling over the counter. "You think you're tough 'cause you wore a uniform? Huh? You think that means something out here?" The soldier set his cup down. He didn't rise to the bait. "I don't think anything about you," he said simply. "I just wanted coffee." Razor's face reddened. He glanced at his friends who were watching from a booth near the window, smirking. He needed to save face, needed to show he was still in control. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door. The soldier exhaled quietly, picked up his coffee, and moved to a small table by the window. He sat with his back to the room, facing the road. He didn't want trouble. He'd seen enough of it. All he wanted was to finish his drink, maybe grab a sandwich and get back on the road before dark. But trouble had already chosen him. A few minutes later, Razor stepped back outside. He stood near the soldier's truck, arms crossed, waiting. When the soldier finally came out, coffee cup empty, keys in hand, Razor stepped into his path. "You hear me talking to you in there?" Razor demanded. The soldier stopped. He was taller than Razor, but he didn't use his height as a threat. He just stood there, calm as still water. "I heard you," he said. I didn't have anything to say back. That was the wrong answer. Razor's eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched. And then, without warning, he spat, right in the soldier's face. The glob of spit landed on his cheek, sliding slowly down toward his jaw. It was hot, humiliating, deliberate. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The cicadas fell silent. The wind held its breath. Even the distant hum of a passing car faded away. The soldier didn't flinch. Didn't wipe it off right away. He just stood there, eyes locked on Razor's, his expression unreadable. But if you looked close, you'd see the storm behind his eyes. Not rage, but something deeper. Disappointment, sadness. Like he'd seen this before, and it still hurt. Razor smirked, stepping back. "That's what you get for thinking you belong here," he muttered, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Then he turned and walked back to his friends, who laughed and slapped him on the back like he'd just scored a touchdown. Inside the diner, Lily had watched the whole thing through the window. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. She'd never seen anything so cruel, so senseless. Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to run outside to say something, but fear held her back. Instead, she did the only thing she could think of. She pulled out her phone, zoomed in through the glass, and snapped a photo just as the soldier slowly raised his hand and wiped the spit from his face. He didn't yell. Didn't curse. Didn't throw a punch. He just got into his truck, started the engine, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Razor and his crew stayed outside, laughing, lighting cigarettes, acting like they'd just won something. But Lily knew better. She looked at the photo on her screen, the soldier's face, the streak on his cheek, the quiet dignity in his posture, and felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't know his name. Didn't know where he was headed. But she knew one thing for sure. What Razor had done wasn't strength. It was weakness. And someone needed to say so. Back on the road, the soldier kept his eyes on the highway. His hands were steady on the wheel, but inside emotions churned like a stormy sea. He thought about his unit, his brothers and sisters in arms, some of whom hadn't made it home. He thought about the oath he'd taken, not just to defend the country, but to uphold its ideals even when the country failed to live up to them. He reached up and touched his cheek where the spit had been. It was dry now, but the shame wasn't his. He took a deep breath, rolled down the window, and let the warm Georgia air rush in. The sun was sinking lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Up ahead, the road stretched on, long, winding, uncertain. But he kept driving, not because he was running away, but because he knew where he was going, and he knew who he was. Behind him, in the rearview mirror, the diner and the man who'd tried to break him grew smaller and smaller, until they disappeared into the horizon. But the story wasn't over. Not even close, because sometimes the quietest moments, the ones where you choose not to fight back with fists but with your humanity, are the ones that echo the loudest. And this moment? It was about to shake more than just one small town. The soldier didn't stop again until he crossed the state line into North Carolina. By then, the sun had dipped below the trees and the sky was a soft bruise of purple and gray. He pulled into a quiet roadside rest area, killed the engine, and just sat there for a long time, listening to the crickets and the distant hush of tires on pavement. His face was clean now. He'd washed it at a gas station bathroom an hour back, but the feeling hadn't left. Not the spit itself, but the weight behind it. The message, "You don't belong." He closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the seat. He wasn't angry, not really. Anger burned hot and fast, and he'd learned long ago that it didn't last. What lingered was something quieter, heavier, disappointment. Not just in that man, but in the world that let people like him believe they had the right to treat others like dirt. He thought about calling someone, his mom, maybe, or one of his old squad mates, but what would he say? Some guy spat on me today because I'm black and wore a cap that said I served my country. It sounded too small to say out loud, and yet it felt huge inside his chest. So he stayed silent. He always had. Instead, he started the truck again and kept driving through the night, guided by the glow of the dashboard and the rhythm of the road. By dawn, he was home. His house sat at the end of a quiet street in a town where everyone knew your name but didn't pry too much. It was small, a porch with peeling white paint, a garden his mother tended with stubborn love, and a flagpole out front where an American flag hung, crisp and clean, even after rain. He parked in the driveway, grabbed his duffel bag, and walked up the steps just as the first light touched the roof. The screen door creaked open before he even reached it. "There he is," his mother said, her voice warm like fresh bread. She was in her robe, hair wrapped in a scarf, eyes bright with relief. She didn't hug him right away. She knew he needed space sometimes, but she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling like she'd been waiting for this moment for a year. "Hey, Mama," he said, stepping inside. She took one look at his face and knew something was off. Not hurt, not broken, but tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. She didn't ask. She never did. Instead, she went to the kitchen and started making breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, grits with butter melting on top. The kind of meal that said, "You're safe now." He sat at the table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that said, "World's Best Son," in faded letters. The house smelled like cinnamon and old wood. Outside, birds chirped. A neighbor waved from across the street. Normal life. Quiet life. The kind he'd fought to protect, even if some people didn't seem to want him in it. Later that morning, he changed into clean clothes and drove to the community center on Elm Street. It was a modest building with mismatched chairs, a basketball hoop out back, and walls covered in kids' drawings. He'd been volunteering there for years, first as a way to stay grounded after his first deployment, then because he genuinely loved it. The kids called him Sarge, not because he asked them to, but because they'd seen the photos on the wall, him in uniform, receiving a medal, standing with his unit. They didn't know the details, but they knew he'd been somewhere hard and come back to help them. That afternoon, a group of teenagers were gathered in the main room, arguing over a game of chess and doing homework at folding tables. When he walked in, a few looked up and grinned. "Sarge, you're back. Did you bring those books you promised?" He nodded, pulling a stack of used novels from his bag. Sci-fi, mystery, a couple of biographies. "Told you I would." He spent the next few hours helping with math problems, listening to a shy girl talk about wanting to be a nurse, and refereeing a heated debate about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. No one asked where he'd been. No one mentioned the army unless he brought it up. Here, he wasn't a symbol or a target. He was just himself, and that was enough. But back in Georgia, something was stirring. Lily couldn't stop thinking about what she'd seen. That night after her shift ended, she sat on her bed with her laptop open. She looked at the photo again. The soldier's face, the streak on his cheek, the way he stood so still like a tree in a storm. It haunted her. She didn't know his name, but she knew he deserved better than silence. She opened a local Facebook group called Southern Neighbors and typed a message. "This man stopped at Mama Lou's today. He was polite, quiet, just getting coffee. A biker spat on his face and called him a name just for being black. He didn't fight back. He just wiped his face and left. I don't know who he is, but I know he served our country. His cap said U.S. Army. If anyone knows him, tell him we see him. And tell that biker, shame on you." She attached the photo and hit post. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes, a comment or two. But within an hour, the post had been shared 50 times. Then 100. People were furious. Veterans pages picked it up. Local news reporters started calling Mama Lou's. Someone recognized the biker, his nickname, his club, even his job at a tire shop outside town. The story spread like wildfire, not because it was shocking. Sadly, stories like this weren't rare, but because of how the soldier had responded. No violence, no shouting, just quiet dignity. By the next morning, national news outlets were running the photo with headlines like, "Veteran spat on, chooses grace over rage." Back in North Carolina, the soldier had no idea. He was helping a group of kids build a robot for a school competition, laughing as wires sparked and someone dropped a screw into a cup of soda. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. It wasn't until his mother came to the center, eyes wide, holding her tablet, that he realized what was happening. "They're talking about you," she said, voice trembling. "All over the news." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She showed him the photo. His stomach dropped. He didn't want this, didn't ask for it. The last thing he wanted was to be a symbol, a headline, a lesson in how to respond to racism. He just wanted to live his life. Reporters started calling the community center. Some showed up with cameras hoping for a statement. He turned them all away. "I'm not giving interviews," he told the director firmly. "This isn't about me." But the world wouldn't let it go. Then came the call from a small podcast run by a retired Marine. They weren't looking for drama. They just wanted to understand. "We don't need your name," the host said. "Just your voice, if you're willing." After a long pause, he agreed. A few days later, he sat in a quiet room with a microphone, no cameras, just sound. He spoke slowly, choosing his words like stones on a path. "I served because I believed in something bigger than myself," he said. "Not because I thought everyone would thank me. I knew some people wouldn't even see me as human. But that's not on me. That's on them. What happened at that diner? It hurt, but it didn't change who I am. And it won't stop me from doing what's right." He paused, then added, "I served so people like him could have the freedom to say what they want, even hate. But dignity? That's louder than spit. Always has been." The episode dropped on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, it had been shared over 500,000 times. People quoted his words on social media. Teachers played it in classrooms. Veterans wrote letters saying, "You spoke for all of us." Still, he didn't seek the spotlight. He went back to the community center the next day like nothing had changed. But the kids noticed. They looked at him differently, not with pity but with pride. One boy, maybe 12, tugged his sleeve after class. "Sarge, are you mad at that guy?" He knelt so they were eye to eye. "Mad? Yeah, a little. But being mad won't fix anything. What fixes things is showing up. Every day. Doing the right thing even when it's hard. Even when nobody's watching." The boy nodded slowly, like he was storing those words away for later. Meanwhile, the backlash against the biker grew. His employer, a local auto shop, got flooded with calls. Customers posted online, "I won't let a racist work on my car." Within a week, he was fired. His landlord, worried about protests, gave him a notice to move out. His so-called brothers in the motorcycle club started avoiding his calls. One even posted online, "We don't stand for hate." That's on him. For the first time in his life, the biker was alone. No crowd to laugh with him. No one to back him up. Just silence. And in that silence, he started to hear something he'd never listened to before. His own conscience. He tried to delete his old social media posts. The ones bragging about keeping things real and not backing down. But screenshots were everywhere. Memes mocked him. News clips replayed the moment over and over. He couldn't escape it. At night, he'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the soldier's face, the calm, the stillness. Why hadn't he fought back? Why hadn't he yelled? It would have been easier to hate someone who yelled. But this quiet strength, it confused him. And worse, it shamed him. Back in North Carolina, the soldier kept his head down. He helped a single mom fix her car. He tutored a girl struggling with algebra. He sat with an elderly neighbor who'd lost her husband, just listening as she talked about their 50 years together. He didn't do these things for praise. He did them because they mattered, because connection mattered. One evening, as he walked home from the community center, a package was waiting on his porch. No return address. Inside was a simple wooden plaque, hand-carved. It read, "Courage isn't always loud." Below it, a note. "From a stranger who needed to hear your words today. Thank you." He held it for a long time, then hung it on the wall beside his medals. He still didn't want fame. But maybe, just maybe, his silence had spoken louder than he ever imagined. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, a man who'd once thought hate made him strong was beginning to wonder if real strength looked more like the man he'd spat on. The story wasn't over, not even close, but for now, in this quiet town, under a sky full of stars, the soldier went inside, made himself a cup of tea and sat on the porch, listening to the night. Peace wasn't the absence of trouble. It was the choice to keep going anyway, and he was still going. The biker didn't see it coming, not really. At first, he thought the whole thing would blow over in a day or two. People got mad online all the time, then forgot by breakfast. He even laughed about it with his buddies that night, mimicking the way the soldier had just stood there like a statue. What a punk, he'd said, puffing out his chest. Didn't even have the guts to swing back. They'd all chuckled, clinking beer bottles like they'd won something. But the next morning, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts from people he barely knew. Calls from numbers he didn't recognize. His social media inbox flooded with messages, some angry, some sad, a few just saying, "You're better than this." He tried to ignore it, but then his boss called. "Look," the man said, voice tight, "I've known you 10 years. You've always been a hard worker. But the shop's getting calls, dozens of them. Customers saying they won't come back if you're still here. I can't lose my business over this," the biker argued. Swore it was just a stupid joke, that people were overreacting. But his boss didn't budge. "You're done after today," he said quietly. "Clean out your locker." Just like that, his job was gone. He drove home in silence, the engine of his bike sounding hollow. His wife didn't say much when he walked in. She just looked at him with tired eyes like she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Is it true?" she asked, arms crossed. "Did you really do that?" He wanted to lie, wanted to say it wasn't that bad. But something in her voice, the disappointment, the quiet hurt, made the words stick in his throat. "Yeah," he muttered. "But it wasn't." She held up a hand. Just don't." That night she packed a bag for herself and the kids. "I'm staying with my sister," she said. "I can't raise them around this kind of hate." He tried to stop her, but she was already out the door, the taillights of her car disappearing down the street like a warning flare. Alone in the house, he paced the living room, kicking over a chair in frustration. He turned on the TV, hoping for distraction, but there it was again, a local news segment about the spitting incident, showing the photo Lily had taken. The reporter called it a hate-fueled assault. A civil rights lawyer was interviewed, saying it could be prosecuted as a hate crime under state law. His stomach twisted. He'd never thought of it like that. To him, it was just something he did, a reflex, a way to show who was in charge. But now, with his job gone, his family gone, and the whole town talking about him like he was a monster, it didn't feel like power anymore. It felt like a trap, one he'd built himself. Worse, his so-called brothers started pulling away. One by one, they stopped answering his calls. The group chat went silent. When he showed up at their usual hangout, a garage on the edge of town, they acted like he wasn't there. One guy finally pulled him aside. "Look, man," he said, not meeting his eyes. "We like you. But it's bad for the club. People think we're all like you now. We can't have that, so I'm just out," he asked, voice cracking. "It's not personal," the other man said, already walking away. Not personal, but it felt like everything. He tried to delete his old posts, the ones with Confederate flags, the rants about taking the country back, the jokes that weren't really jokes. But it was too late. Screenshots were everywhere. A local high school teacher even showed one in class as an example of everyday racism. Kids he'd passed on the street now stared at him like he was dangerous. He stopped going out. Sat in his dark living room, curtains drawn, eating cold leftovers and watching reruns of old shows. The silence was the worst part. No laughter. No kids running through the house. No wife humming in the kitchen. Just him, his thoughts, and the growing weight of what he'd done. Meanwhile, the soldier remained quiet, but his silence was doing more than shouting ever could. Veterans groups across the country began using his story in their outreach programs. "This is what real strength looks like," one commander told his troops. "Not fists, not fury, dignity." Churches held discussions about racial healing, playing the podcast clip where the soldier said, "Dignity is louder than spit." Even schools started talking about it, not as a lesson in victimhood, but in resilience. Back in North Carolina, the soldier kept showing up at the community center like always, but now more kids came. Parents brought their children saying, "We want them to see what honor looks like." He never made a speech, never stood on a soapbox. He just kept doing what he'd always done, listening, helping, showing up. One afternoon, a local reporter finally caught him outside the center. "Can I ask you one question?" she said gently. "Do you hate him?" He thought for a long moment, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. "No," he said finally. "Hate takes too much energy, and I've got better things to do." That quote spread faster than anything else. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something deeper. It was refusal to let someone else's ugliness define his own heart. And that refusal? It was tearing the biker apart, because deep down he'd expected rage. He could have handled rage. Rage he understood. Rage fought back, and then you either won or lost. But this calm, steady refusal to be dragged into the mud with him, it made him feel small, petty, and worse. It made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong his whole life. One night, drunk and desperate, he typed the soldier's words into his phone over and over. "Dignity is louder than spit." He read them until they burned behind his eyes. Who was this man? How could he stand there, covered in shame, and walk away like it meant nothing? He didn't know it yet, but that question was the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Back in Georgia, the police finally opened an official investigation. Lily gave her statement. The diner owner confirmed the date and time. Even one of the biker's former friends came forward saying, "Yeah, he did it," and he bragged about it after. The case wasn't just about the spit. It was about the intent, the racial slur, the public humiliation. Under state law, it could be charged as a misdemeanor hate crime, punishable by fines, community service, even jail time. The biker got a letter in the mail, summoning him to speak with investigators. His hand shook as he read it. Jail for spitting? It felt unreal. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized, maybe he deserved it. But then another thought crept in. What if he could fix this? Not just legally, but really fix it. He didn't know how. Didn't even know where the soldier lived. But he started looking. Scoured news articles, social media, anything that might give a clue. It took weeks, but he finally pieced it together. North Carolina, a small town, a community center on Elm Street. He didn't plan to show up. Not at first. But the idea wouldn't leave him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that face, that quiet strength, and he knew deep in his gut that if he didn't face it, if he didn't face him, he'd spend the rest of his life running from that moment in the diner parking lot. So he sold his bike. Not the whole thing, just enough parts to buy a bus ticket. He packed a single bag with clean clothes, a toothbrush, and the letter from the police. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. Didn't know if he'd be welcome. Didn't even know if the soldier would remember him. But he had to try. The night before he left, he sat on his porch watching the stars. For the first time in years, he felt something other than anger or pride. He felt fear. Real trembling fear. Not of punishment, but of being seen. Truly seen. Not as the tough guy on the bike, but as the scared, broken man underneath, and maybe, just maybe, that was the first real step toward becoming someone else. Back in North Carolina, the soldier had no idea any of this was coming. He was busy helping a group of teens build a garden behind the community center, teaching them how to plant tomatoes and peppers. One of the kids asked, "Sarge, do you ever think about that guy?" He paused, trowel in hand. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I don't let him live rent-free in my head." The kid nodded, then said something that stuck with him. "I hope he changes." The soldier looked at the boy, 12 years old, full of hope, not yet hardened by the world, and smiled faintly. "Me too," he said. "Because if he can change, maybe anyone can." He didn't know it yet, but those words were already coming true. Hundreds of miles away, a man who once thought hate made him strong was boarding a Greyhound bus with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of shame. And he was heading straight for the one person he'd tried to break. But who, without even trying, had already started to rebuild him. The bus ride took 14 hours. The biker sat by the window, staring out at fields, towns, rivers, everything blurring past like scenes from someone else's life. He hadn't slept much the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the soldier's face, the calm, the stillness, the quiet disappointment that cut deeper than any punch ever could. He wore clean jeans and a plain white t-shirt. No patches, no symbols, nothing that screamed who he used to be. Just a man, tired and uncertain, heading toward something he couldn't name. When the bus finally pulled into the small station in North Carolina, early morning light was just beginning to warm the streets. He stepped off, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and stood for a moment. breathing in air that smelled like pine and damp earth. Nothing like the hot asphalt and exhaust fumes of home. He checked the address he'd scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper. Elm Street Community Center. He didn't know what he'd say when he got there. Didn't even know if he'd be allowed inside, but he had to try. It was a 20-minute walk. He passed quiet houses with flower boxes, kids waiting for the school bus, an old man walking a dog. Normal life. Peaceful life. The kind of life he'd never really known. Always chasing noise, anger, the illusion of control. Now walking alone in the cool morning, he felt strangely small. Not weak, just human. And maybe that was okay. By the time he reached the community center, his palms were sweaty. The building looked just like in the photos. Modest, well-kept, with a basketball hoop out back and a hand-painted sign that read, "Everyone welcome." He stood across the street for nearly 10 minutes, watching. Kids were arriving, laughing, shoving each other playfully. A woman unlocked the front door, and then he saw him. The soldier stepped out onto the porch, holding a clipboard, talking to a teenager about something. He looked the same, but softer somehow. Less guarded. He smiled at something the kid said, and the biker felt a pang in his chest he couldn't explain. This was it. He crossed the street slowly, heart hammering. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the bottom of the steps, the soldier looked up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither moved. The soldier didn't look surprised, didn't look angry, just aware. Like he'd been expecting this, even if he didn't know when. The biker stopped a few feet away. His mouth was dry. His hands trembled at his sides. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I came to say I'm sorry." The soldier didn't speak. Just waited. The biker swallowed hard. He looked around, at the kids peeking out the door, at the woman who'd paused by the entrance watching quietly. He knew this wasn't just between them anymore. It never really was. He dropped to one knee. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Like his body finally understood what his words couldn't say. "I was wrong," he said, voice low but clear. "I was hateful. I was cruel. I saw you, and instead of seeing a man, a veteran, a human being, I saw someone I thought I could put down to feel big. And that says everything about me and nothing about you." He looked up, eyes glistening. "You didn't deserve that, not one bit, and I'm ashamed." Silence settled over the yard. Even the birds seemed to hush. The soldier studied him, not with judgment, but with something deeper. Understanding, maybe, or pity, or just plain weariness. After a long pause, he said, "Get up." The biker hesitated, then slowly rose to his feet. "If you mean it," the soldier continued, "then prove it. Not to me, to yourself." He turned slightly and gestured toward the community center. "We run a program here for men who want to turn things around. Former inmates, guys struggling with anger, people who've made bad choices. We work on rebuilding, not just lives, but trust. If you're serious, you can join, but it's not easy. And it's not about me forgiving you, it's about you becoming someone your kids, if you have any, can be proud of." The biker nodded quickly. "I do. I have two, and they don't even know I'm here." "Then do it for them," the soldier said simply. "And for the man you could be." Just then, a local reporter who'd been tipped off about the possible visit stepped forward from behind a tree, camera in hand. "Can I get a comment?" she asked gently. The soldier shook his head. "No photos. No interviews, this isn't a show." The reporter lowered her camera. "Fair enough," she said. "But people should know this happened." "Let them know through actions," the soldier replied. "Not headlines." And that was that. The biker was given a chair in the back of the community room while the soldier introduced him, not by name, not by what he'd done, but as someone who's choosing to change. The kids were wary at first. One boy whispered, "Isn't that the guy from the news?" But the soldier didn't confirm or deny. He just said, Everyone deserves a chance to do better, even when it's hard. That first day, the biker didn't speak much. He listened. He helped carry boxes of donated books. He swept the floor. Small things, humble things. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to prove how tough he was. He just existed. And it was enough. Over the next few weeks, he showed up every Tuesday and Thursday. He sat in on group discussions about respect, accountability, and healing. He heard stories from men who'd been in gangs, who'd hurt people, who'd lost everything and were now trying to build something new. He didn't compare his pain to theirs. He just listened. And slowly he began to speak. One evening, during a circle talk, he said, "I thought hate made me strong, but it was just fear wearing a mask, fear of not being enough, fear of change, and I took that fear out on someone who didn't deserve it." No one clapped. No one praised him. But a few men nodded. One said, "Welcome to the hard part." Back in his hometown, word spread quietly. Not through viral posts, but through phone calls, church bulletins, word of mouth. "He's trying," people said. Some still didn't believe it. "Once a hater, always a hater," one neighbor muttered. But others, especially parents, veterans, folks who'd seen real change, gave him space to grow. His wife heard about it through a cousin. She didn't call right away, but she didn't block his number either. That, he told himself, was something. Meanwhile, the soldier kept his distance, not out of bitterness, but out of respect. He didn't want the biker's change to be about earning his approval. It had to come from within. So he let the program leaders guide him, let the community decide if he belonged. But he watched. Quietly. From afar. One afternoon, he saw the biker helping a little girl tie her shoelaces after she'd fallen off her bike. The man was gentle, patient, showing her how to make the loops without rushing. The girl smiled and ran off, calling, "Thanks, mister." The soldier stood in the doorway, unseen, and felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first flicker of hope. Because real change isn't loud. It doesn't happen in speeches or grand gestures. It happens in quiet moments, tying a shoe, sweeping a floor, showing up when no one's watching. And this man was showing up. One day, the biker asked the soldier if he could speak to the youth group, just 5 minutes, about choices and consequences. The soldier thought about it, then agreed with one condition. No excuses, just truth. So the biker stood in front of a dozen teenagers, hands shaking slightly, and told them everything. How he grew up hearing hate like it was normal. How he wore anger like armor. How he thought spitting on someone would make him feel powerful, but all it did was show how empty he really was. "I thought I was putting him down," he said, voice rough. "But really, I was showing everyone how low I'd sunk." One girl raised her hand. "Do you think he'll ever forgive you?" He looked toward the back of the room where the soldier stood near the door. "I don't know," he said honestly. "And I don't expect him to. But I'm going to keep trying anyway." The soldier gave a small nod, not approval, acknowledgement. Later that week, the police investigator called. The case was still open, but given the biker's cooperation, his participation in the program, and the lack of prior offenses, they were considering dropping the hate crime charge in favor of community service and mandatory counseling. "It's not over," the officer said, "but you're heading in the right direction." The biker thanked him, then hung up and sat on the steps of the community center, watching the sunset. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. Not because he'd been absolved, but because he was finally trying to be better. And sometimes that's where healing begins. Not with a grand apology, but with a single honest step forward. Back inside, the soldier was packing up books for the night. A teen asked, "Sarge, do you think he's really changing?" He paused, then said, "I don't know. But I do know this. If someone's willing to kneel in the dirt and say they were wrong, that's worth paying attention to." And in that moment, under a sky turning gold and pink, 2 men, one who'd once spat in hate, the other who'd walked away in dignity, were both in their own ways, learning how to be human again. 6 months passed like seasons changing, slowly at first, then all at once. The biker still came to the community center every Tuesday and Thursday, but now he didn't linger in the back. He helped set up chairs, tutored kids in basic math, and even started leading a small workshop on fixing bicycles. He'd learned to listen more than he spoke, to ask questions instead of making statements, to hold space instead of demanding attention. His hands, once clenched in anger, now spent their time tightening bolts, tying knots, or handing a pencil to a child who'd dropped theirs. He hadn't seen his kids in person yet, but he wrote them letters every week. Short ones at first, just "I miss you" and "I'm working on being better." Then longer ones, about the stars he saw at night, the funny dog that followed, him on his walks, the taste of the first tomato from the community garden. His wife hadn't replied, but she hadn't returned the letters either. That, he told himself, was a kind of hope. One Saturday morning, as he was patching a flat tire for a teenager, a car pulled up to the curb. He didn't look up at first, just kept working, focused on the rubber and the pump. But then he heard a small voice. "Daddy?" He froze. Slowly, he turned. His youngest stood there, holding his older sibling's hand. His wife stood a few feet behind them, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But she was there. That was all that mattered. He stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked over, heart pounding like it might burst. He didn't reach for them, just stopped a few feet away. "Hey," he said softly. His daughter ran to him. Just like that, no questions, no hesitation, she wrapped her arms around his waist and buried her face in his shirt. He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. His son hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him too. His wife watched, silent. When he looked at her, she gave the smallest nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but permission. A door left slightly ajar. Later, over coffee at a nearby diner, "Not Mama Lou's, never that one again," she said. "I'm not saying it's fixed, but I'm willing to see if it can be." He didn't argue, didn't promise miracles. He just said, "Thank you." Back at the community center, the soldier watched the reunion from the window. He didn't intrude, didn't need to. He'd seen enough to know that real change wasn't measured in headlines or court rulings. It was measured in moments like this. A child's arms around a father who'd finally come home to himself. The soldier had been busy too. What started as a quiet idea, pairing veterans with people trying to leave hate behind, had grown into something real. With help from local churches, counselors, and a few retired officers, he launched a nonprofit called Common Ground. The name wasn't flashy, but it meant something. Not agreement, not forgetting, but shared humanity. The program brought together former gang members, ex-skinheads, veterans struggling with anger, and everyday folks who just wanted to understand each other better. They didn't talk politics. They didn't debate history. They cooked meals together, rebuilt porches for elderly neighbors, planted trees in vacant lots. Action first. Understanding later. It wasn't perfect. Some days were hard. Old habits flared. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. But they kept showing up, and that was the point. One afternoon, the biker approached the soldier after a work session. "I want to help with Common Ground," he said. "Not just as someone being helped, as someone who can help others like me." The soldier studied him for a long moment. "You sure? It's not easy looking in the mirror every day." "I've been doing that for months," the biker said. "Might as well use what I've learned." So he did. He started co-facilitating a weekly group for men leaving extremist groups or violent lifestyles. He didn't preach. He just told his story, the shame, the loneliness, the moment he realized hate had cost him everything that mattered. Men listened. Not because he was perfect, but because he was honest. News of the program spread. Not through viral outrage, but through quiet word of mouth. A school in another state invited them to speak. A veterans hospital asked for a workshop. Even a few motorcycle clubs, ones that had banned hate symbols, reached out, wanting to learn how to create safer spaces. Then came the invitation, the National Veterans Leadership Conference, held in Washington, D.C. They wanted the soldier to accept the Medal of Civilian Courage, a rare honor given not for battle, but for moral strength in everyday life. He almost said no. He hated ceremonies, speeches, the spotlight. But the organizers said, people need to hear this. Not just what happened, but what came after. So he agreed. The day of the event, the biker sat in the audience wearing a clean button-down shirt, no tattoos showing, hands folded in his lap. He'd driven 10 hours to be there, not as a guest, but as a witness. When the soldier stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. He looked out at the sea of uniforms, medals, and weathered faces, men and women who'd seen war and come home carrying its weight. He took a breath. I didn't do anything special, he began, voice calm. I just chose not to become what they said I was. That day at the diner, I could have fought back. Could have yelled. Could have let that moment define me as a victim or as a warrior. But I realized something. The real fight isn't out there. It's in here. He tapped his chest. It's choosing every single day to believe in people, even the ones who hurt you. He paused, then looked directly at the biker in the third row. Because if we give up on each other, what's the point of any of it? We serve so others can be free, even to make mistakes. But freedom also means the chance to change, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone try. The room erupted in applause, not polite clapping, but a standing ovation that shook the walls. Tears streamed down faces. Veterans hugged strangers. In that moment, it wasn't about politics or race or past wounds. It was about hope. Afterward, the biker waited outside the hall. When the soldier came out, they stood in silence for a moment, the city humming around them. I'm proud of you, the soldier said simply. The biker shook his head. I'm just trying to be someone worth being proud of. You already are. They didn't hug. Didn't need to. The understanding between them was deeper than gestures. Back home, life went on, quieter, steadier. The biker moved into a small apartment near his kid's school. He got a job at a hardware store, where his boss didn't care about his past, only his work ethic. On weekends, he volunteered at Common Ground, mentoring a young man who'd been kicked out of his house for refusing to join his family's hate group. You don't have to be what they say you are, the biker told him. You get to choose. The soldier kept running the center, but now he had help. Dozens of volunteers, grants from small foundations, even a retired teacher who came twice a week to run a writing group for teens. One day, a boy handed him a poem he'd written. It ended with the line, "Dignity is louder than spit, and it echoes forever." He pinned it to the bulletin board next to the wooden plaque he'd received months ago. Years later, people would still talk about that moment in the Georgia diner, not as a story of hate, but as a turning point. Schools used it in character education classes. Documentaries featured interviews with Lily, the waitress who took the photo, now a social worker helping teens navigate prejudice. Even the old diner changed its name to Second Chance Diner and hung a sign that read, "All are welcome here." But the real legacy wasn't in the stories or the signs. It was in the everyday choices, a father reading to his kids at night, a veteran listening to a man who once hated him, a teenager choosing kindness over cruelty because someone showed them it was possible. One evening, as the sun set over the community garden, now full of tomatoes, peppers, and sunflowers, the soldier and the biker sat on a bench, sipping iced tea. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, like old friends who'd walked through fire together and come out the other side. Do you ever think about that day? The biker asked finally. Sometimes, the soldier said, but mostly I think about today, and that was the truth. The past was a lesson, not a life sentence. What mattered was what you did with the time you had left. As the fireflies began to blink in the gathering dusk, two men, one who'd once spat in hate, the other who'd walked away in grace, sat side by side, not as enemies, not as heroes, but as humans who'd chosen, against all odds, to believe in each other. And in a world that often feels broken, that choice, that quiet, stubborn belief in the possibility of change is the most powerful thing of all.